Hi, fourth grade history. I hope you all are doing well as usual. Today we are going to expand our westward expansion unit, and mostly our lessons have been positive so far. Lewis and Clark expedition seems like a positive thing, right? Sacagawea, positive, brave woman. We've also studied the Louisiana Purchase. All of these things seem to help America grow and to see new opportunities for our country. However, it is very important as historians to always look at both sides of a story. So today we're going to talk about an idea rather than a war or an article or a historical person, because ideas are the things that really move history. Our country was founded on very important ideas like liberty and freedom and equality. And sometimes we have to ask our country if they were always following those ideas or if they were ignoring those ideas for their own benefit. And so today we're going to kind of talk about something that's a little bit more negative in history. And it's a kind of a belief um, that America was destined to explore the West, but at any cost. Okay, so we're going to go over a PowerPoint presentation, and then you guys will be doing some worksheet work, and then we have a little video at the end. We'll also be examining a painting as well. So I'm going to share my screen with you all. Okay. Let me get my view slideshow. Okay, before we go over our objectives, I have some questions for you to ponder. What are some things our country should be proud of? And what are some things that our country should be ashamed of? So when we think about great things that our country has done, we'd like to think about the Revolutionary War, standing up against unfair taxes and a tyrannical king. We would like to think about the Emancipation Proclamation and freeing the slaves and fighting in the Civil War. We'd like to think about positive heroes who were so brave. We'd like to think about our founding fathers who created the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. But there are some things that our country maybe should not be so proud of, right? The triangular trade, the institution of slavery, and also what we're going to be talking about today is the idea of this thing called manifest destiny, which meant that it was our destiny by God to have America be the greatest country in the world, but at whatever cost. And so they were trying to move our country forward, but at the same time, removing an entire culture of Native Americans who are already settled on the land. So I want you to also think about this question. Who is in charge of history? Who gets to tell the stories? Who gets to tell the stories are the victors of history, right? The winners of the wars. And they tell their side of the story and how things came to be. But I'd want you to think about, what if history was written by the losers of history? People who lost wars. I bet our textbooks would look a little bit differently. And I bet westward expansion told by Native Americans would seem a little bit more dark than the positive, brave stories we hear about Lewis and Clark. Okay, so here are our objectives. We're going to describe the term manifest destiny and how Americans justified their expansion, right? Giving reasons as to what they were doing was okay. And then we're going to examine the positive and negative effects of manifest destiny, because not everything in our history can be positive. So what is or was manifest destiny? In the late 1700s and 1800s, Americans everywhere shared a common belief called manifest destiny. So first, what is a destiny? What does it mean to be destined to do something? The dictionary defines destiny as something that is to happen or has happened to a particular person or thing. So it is meant to happen. Some people believe that destiny is given by God, right? So something that you're meant to do that you can't really get out of, that your destiny will follow you. And so Americans believe that they were destined to do something, but what? And second, what does manifest mean? Okay. So if something is manifest, it means that it's clear or obvious to the eye to do something. So manifest means it's a no-brainer or clear as an adjective. So Americans believed that they were destined to do something and that whatever that something was a no-brainer. And they believed it was obvious that everyone should know about it. So what was it? Here is the definition of manifest destiny. And this is where you'll want to jot this down on your worksheet number 1. Manifest destiny was the belief that the United States had a God-given right to expand across the entire continent of North America. The expansion of the US was both justified due to their belief of a superior culture. So because we Americans believed that we were superior culture over the Native Americans, we kind of developed this idea that it was our God-given right to expand and to kind of take over the land no matter what. It wasn't like a Bible story where God appeared to Lewis and Clark and said, you must do this. No, it was kind of just this idea that in order to be a successful nation, we had to expand. But the treatment of the Native Americans was not so positive. Many were killed, many were tortured, or even shoved off to a little corner of a land and said, hey, you Native Americans, I know that you've lived here for a long, long time, hundreds of years, but we're gonna just push you and you can have like this corner of the state, right? And so that doesn't really seem fair today to us, but back then it was manifest destiny. It was clear, it was obvious, it was destined to happen. Okay, so here's a map, right, of us kind of slowly expanding in 1860 and 1850, and then boom, we eventually, you can see all the colored states that we're starting to add: Texas and Utah and New Mexico and Oregon. Okay. All right, so this expansion is due to manifest destiny. If anyone asks you, hey, how do we have 50 states? You go right back and say, well, manifest destiny was the justification to expand west. So how do we know that Americans felt this way? Like, how do we know that they thought it was their God-given right to expand and that they could do this no matter what? Well, I found some evidence of some primary sources from the time. There was a man named John O'Sullivan, and he wrote an article called The Great Nation of Futurity. Futurity. It's hard to say. 1839. Let's see what he has to say. Our national birth was the beginning of a new history, the formation and progress of an untried political system, which separates us from the past and connects us with the future only, and so far as regards the entire development of the natural rights of man in moral, political, and national life, we may confidently assume that our country is destined to be the great nation of futurity. Yes, we are the nation of progress, of individual freedom, of universal enfranchisement, and we must carry onward to the fulfillment of our mission, to the principle of our organization, to bring freedom of conscience, freedom of person, freedom of trade and business pursuits, universality of freedom, and equality. All this will be our future history, to establish on earth the moral dignity and salvation of man, the immutable truth and beneficence of God. America been chosen, and her high example shall smite unto death the tyranny of kings, hierarchs, and oligarchs, and carry the glad tidings of peace and goodwill. Who then can doubt that our country is destined to be the great nation of futurity? Yikes. Well, John O'Sullivan, he says glad tidings of peace and goodwill. I'm not so sure that violence towards Native Americans was bringing glad tidings of peace, but that's just me. So he is explaining that, yes, we are destined to expand, and we are destined to kind of be this great nation of examples that are opposite of tyranny of kings and hierarchy, and it's all about freedom of the person, but freedom of particular people and not all people. And that's where it gets a little fishy. Okay, so this painting is kind of encompasses the idea of manifest destiny. This painting was published in 1872 by a man named John Guest, and it became super popular. You will see this painting in lots of museums and a lot of textbooks. You can find it online everywhere. Let's examine this painting for a bit. We have this large, kind of like angelic looking woman, right? She's clothed in white, she's bright, she's got a star headband, right? And she is carrying some lines, isn't she? She's carrying electrical telegram lines, and she's also carrying a book. And I want you at the end to research what is on her book. What are the words on her book? And on Zoom, you can come with the answer to me, because I think it's really cool. Look at the right-hand side of the painting. Everything is bright and light, right? And notice that it's on the east side, right? The right side of the painting. And you can see kind of what seems to be a civilized town behind, right? Boats in the background. You see trains in the background. And you see settlers with, that seems like they are plowing with some ox, and they are farming their land, and they are white men, right? You can also see the wagons, right, of the Oregon Trail. But if you look on the left side, the west side, you see darkness, and you see mystery and dark clouds and buffalo running away and Native Americans scurrying and protesting, and it's very dark, right? And so this painting is kind of giving us an idea that the East is civilized and bright and positive, and that somehow the West, which is uncivilized, filled with Native Americans, is somehow less superior and a negative thing. And that Lady Liberty, aka symbol for America, it is her duty to bring this civilization and expand and move it to the West, right? So this is packed with symbolism, and we're going to take a little better look at it in a little while. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to share it again. And give me 1 second. Let's interpret the painting a little bit more. Okay, here's what I want. Okay, interpreting the painting. Everything in the painting is traveling to the left, the west. The floating heavenly woman in the middle looks forward with purpose while she strings telegraph wire across the land. Trains and carriages take over while the Native Americans and animals scatter. The animals are domesticated on the right? They're tamed, they're controlled by the humans, and they're wild and loose on the left. The white men confidently walk, they stride, while the Native Americans run and protest. Even the right side of the painting is lighter and brighter than the dark and untamed West. So it's definitely clear how Americans felt about the West, that that without this expansion, that the West was going to be this untamed, uncivilized place. Okay. Last year, I actually had my class, there's the painting again, kind of brightened a little bit so you can see. Last year, I had my class do a painting that's similar to American Progress. That's what the painting is called. But they wanted to draw it from the opposite point of view from the Native Americans. And so they kind of changed the angel woman to kind of this frightening woman who was taking over their land. And it was really neat to see their interpretation. So I'm going to give that assignment to you all later as well. Okay. Let's now go ahead and look at the negative effects of westward expansion. And I'm not saying there's not positive effects. We have been studying the positive effects of westward expansion. However, I again repeat, it is so important to look at both sides of history. So we covered what is manifest destiny. We see the map. Okay. The biggest negative effect of westward expansion and the idea of manifest destiny is Indian removal. So let's read. On behalf of white settlers who wanted to grow cotton on the Indians' land, the federal government forced them to leave their homelands and walk thousands of miles to specially designated reservations across the Mississippi River. And this journey is known as the Trail of Tears. And in fact, many Native Americans perished. They died on this Trail of Tears, this journey. So imagine if one day someone just said, hey, you can't live in your neighborhood anymore, and you're going to have to walk miles and miles and miles to a place where we think that you should live, right? It doesn't seem fair, does it? And also, a lot of people have shied away from using the term Indian nowadays, just because, remember when we were settling, the purpose was to find a passage to India, and they didn't know where they were. And so a lot of people prefer to use Native Americans. Native means, right, they were there first. The government was also stretched very thin. They didn't have the newfound power to just take over the United States. So the government really couldn't protect people from harm as a settler. So all of the settlers were exposed to disease. They had to bring their own resources. They were subjected to famine, starvation. So there was not a lot of help from the government to go west. We're going to save the Alamo for later because you already did an entire lesson on that. But as you know, the Alamo was a battle during the war in which Mexican troops launched an assault on the Alamo, which used to be a Catholic mission near San Antonio, and it killed all of the Texan defenders to get rid of resistance. And I think this is my last negative effect, the spreading of slavery. So since they have all this new vast land, now the farmers require more people to work, and so they depended on the slaves for the work. And the negative consequences of following trails west. Westward movement of many U.S. settlers was disastrous to the local Native American populations. It was due to diseases brought forth by American settlers. So the Native Americans did not get things like measles and mumps and all of those crazy diseases. The Europeans brought them over. And violence that broke out between Indians and settlers. They were disastrous to many Americans, proving to be a perilous journey for both traders and settlers. So settlers died from disease and famine, and animals were also lost due to the lack of resources and attacks by other wild animals in the West and Indian attacks. And here are the sources. Okay. All right. The last thing that we will do is we are going to look at some things that you will be responsible for after this lesson. So you have this sheet right here. You're going to examine the painting. You can Google it or pause my screen, American Progress by John Gast, 1872. You're going to answer these 6 questions, examining the painting, kind of listen to what I've said about it, and answer the questions there. And you will also answer, let me share my screen once more. You will answer questions on this worksheet, all about the idea of manifest destiny, and at the end it has the positive and negative effects. Okay? All right. And lastly, I want to end positively because I know that was like kind of negative and heavy, but remember, it's important to note that history is always written by the victors, and we need to remember what were some negative effects of our actions, right? But let's go ahead and end on something positive. I'm going to end with a Schoolhouse Rock video. I know you guys love those. And this one's called Elbow Room. And so this is them explaining why they're moving west, right? We do know that the 13 colonies were getting overpopulated, so they needed elbow room to kind of move west. So I'm going to share my screen with you again. Not that. It's this one. Skip forward. Sorry. Okay.
One thing you will discover when you get next to one another is everybody needs some elbow room, elbow room. It's nice when you're kind of cozy, but not when you're tangled nose to nosy. Oh, everybody needs some elbow, needs a little elbow room. That's how it was in the early days of the USA. The people kept coming to settle, though the East was the only place there was to go. The president was Thomas Jefferson. He made a deal with Napoleon. How'd you like to sell a mile or two? Or 3 or 100 or 1,000? And so in 1803, the Louisiana Territory was sold to us without a fuss and gave us lots of elbow room. Oh, elbow room, elbow room. You got to get us some elbow room. It's the West or bust. In God we trust. There's a new land out there. Lewis and Clark volunteered to go. Goodbye, good luck, wear your overcoat. They prepared for good times and for bad, They hired Sacagawea to be their guide. She led them all across the countryside, reached the coast, and found the most elbow room we've ever had. The way was opened up for folks with bravery. There were plenty of fights to win land rights, but the West was meant to be. It was a manifest destiny. The trappers, traders, and the peddlers, the politicians and the settlers, they got there by any way they could. The gold rush trampled down the wilderness, the railroads spread across from east to west, and soon the rest was opened up for good. And now we jet from east to west, goodbye New York, hello LA. But it took those early folks to open up the way. Now we've got a lot of room to be growing from sea to shining sea. Guess that we have got our elbow room. But if there should ever come a time when we're crowded up together, I'm sure we'll find some elbow room up on the moon. Oh, elbow room. Got to get us some elbow room. It's the room no bust. In God we trust. There's a new land up there.
So ironically, we're getting lots of elbow room now with the coronavirus, aren't we? But I just wanted to share that with you guys. It's kind of like a more positive view of Manifest Destiny. And the last thing I'd like to share with you all, which is completely optional, is there is a song that I love by one of my favorite bands called the Avett Brothers. And they wrote a song called We Americans. And it's quite political, but it does talk about this man who is conflicted because he's so proud of his country, but at the same time knows that his ancestors did some things that he was not very proud of. And there's one line in the song, and it says, the arrogance of Manifest Destiny, right? That we were too proud to admit that this might not have been our God given destiny to kill Native Americans, right? God would never want that kind of violence. But I think that Thomas Jefferson and all of the settlers, they did need to expand. They were overpopulated. It's just, I think if we had to rewind, we would have done things differently, right? So instead of having war solve all problems, we would think about talking it out and writing a treaty, a peace treaty of some sort. So just some things to think about. That is the end of our lesson. Go ahead and complete those 2 sheets, the painting examination of American Progress by John Gast and the Manifest Destiny sheet. And that is it. All right. See you guys later.